We call this slideshow the magical disappearing completed operations coverage. And the purpose of it is to demonstrate the impact that the so-called continuing injury endorsement, or sometimes it's called a first known injury endorsement, what this endorsement has and the damage that it does to the completed operations coverage in your general liability policy. This is an important endorsement for contractors because that completed operations coverage is so important for contractors in defending against construction defect claims. First, let's talk about the completed operations coverage. It's important to know what you're losing before we analyze the actual impact of the endorsement itself. Your standard ISO general liability policy covers two major areas. It covers your ongoing operations, the work that you're performing right now. It also covers your completed operations. For example, the work that you performed yesterday or day before yesterday, even 5, 10, or 15 years ago. Now that's a very important coverage for contractors because that's the coverage area that most often responds to construction defect claims. Your typical construction defect claim is not going to come during the course of a construction. It'll come after the construction is complete, perhaps 4 years down the line, 5 years down the line, as much as 10 years down the line. In Texas, the statute of repose is 10 years. However, even a latent defect can extend that statute of repose period longer than 10 years. So it's a very important coverage for contractors. Now let's look at a construction defect claim and examine how a general liability policy will respond under the completed operations coverage. Let's assume in this case our project is Notre Dame, and we built the project 5 years ago. In year 5, we're presented with a claim, and the allegation is water infiltration. It's also alleged that water has been infiltrating the building for the last 5 years, and this is known as a continuing injury, meaning that the injury has taken place across multiple policy years. So we file the claim with our current carrier, and the completed operations coverage of the policy will respond, both with defense of the claim and indemnity. In addition, we may present claims to prior years, seeking to cover the damage that took place in those years as well. Potentially, we have the ability to stack all those insurance policies on top of each other to create a massive blanket of coverage. This provides quite a bit of coverage to the contractor faced with a construction defect lawsuit. At least this is how insurance should respond to the claim. Now let's add the continuing injury endorsement to the mix. First of all, it's going to limit coverage to the policy period when you first knew of the occurrence. As a result, you will have no coverage for damage occurring in prior policy years. You will not have the ability to go back to prior policy years to seek and create that blanket of coverage for the construction defect claim. Some endorsements will go even farther. For example, Liberty Mutual has an endorsement that says the following: this insurance does not apply to bodily injury or property damage within the completed operations hazard if the injury or damage first occurred prior to the effective date of this policy. This sort of endorsement is incredibly damaging because it will eliminate completed operations coverage even in the current policy year. Now let's return to our defect claim example and see what the impact of those endorsements will be in that example. Most of the endorsements that you'll see are going to eliminate your ability to go back to prior years for coverage for any damage that took place during those years. Now that's a significant loss of coverage. You're going to lose the ability to get that blanket of stacking limits for the defect claim. Plus, if the significant portion or any significant portion of the damage took place during those years, let's say in our example, if 80% of the damage took place in years 1 and 2, and only the remaining 20% took place in years 3, 4, and 5, then we're going to have a significant uninsured exposure. But the Liberty endorsement, and it's not just Liberty, don't mean to pick on Liberty, but there are other carriers that provide it, but there's the best example. It's going to eliminate coverage even for the current year. This is going to be devastating for contractors because they're going to be completely uninsured for any continuing injury. Will provide no completed operations coverage for any construction defect that will span multiple policy years. This is a very serious issue for any contractor. Let's look specifically how the endorsement works. It's magic. And again, we use the word magic facetiously. This is not a magic show that you want to attend. First, it erodes the completed operations coverage for any continuing injury that spans multiple policy years. That's key. At a minimum, this is going to create an uninsured gap for damages sustained in policy years other than the one in which you first knew of the damage. So you lose, again, that ability to stack insurance coverage. At worst, the endorsement destroys even coverage for damage in the current policy year. It's not just a theory. We've seen this in reality. For example, in Boss Management Services, Inc. versus Acceptance Insurance Company, a masonry contractor was sued for construction defect due to moisture infiltration. His insurance policy, both the GL policy and the umbrella, contain the endorsement that excludes losses for first occurred prior to the inception date. As a result, both his GL carrier and his umbrella carrier denied both the duty to defend and the duty to indemnify. That's very significant. What are the solutions? Well, the key is to find an agent who will not tolerate this gap in coverage in the first place. But barring that, you have to read the policy. And not just the policy, you have to read all the endorsements. You also need to learn to look for the sleight of hand. Learn to recognize the key language used in the endorsement. There is no standard form endorsement. All the carriers have different endorsement and the language varies slightly. You need to recognize the key language, first known injury, continuing injury endorsement that's going to be present in your GL, umbrella, or excess layers. You need to also demand removal of the endorsement from your policy. If you were not told about the addition of this policy, you need to have it removed or find a carrier willing to offer the coverage. But beware, fixing or removing the endorsement from a current policy year or a future renewal policy year will not cure prior policy years. The only way to cure that gap in coverage is to have the endorsement removed from all prior policy years. This concludes this presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to call us at 800-438-8346. Thank you for your time.